Bright Duty. Every student matters.
Now, until now, we came to learn about the various events of the revolt. We also saw how it spread to major cities in northern part of India and the events that unfolded during the revolt of 1857 in these places like Lucknow, Awadh, Bareilly, etc. Right? Now, let us look at atrocities that were committed by the British on Indians and Indians on the British during the 1857 and 58 period, basically during the period of the revolt. Okay. Now, one of the other important features of the uprising of 1857 is the cruelty that was seen on both the sides, both the British as well as the Indian sides. Okay, the cruelty that was applied. Okay, the cruelty with which the fight took place. Okay, now some of the acts and some of the wars and some of the events that took place during the revolt that were very brutal. Okay, those were very brutal in nature. Okay, and a writer has described it as a contest between two savage races, capable of no thought but that, regardless of all justice or mercy, their enemies should be exterminated. Okay, and Dr. R.C. Majumdar, he has said that historical truth and political fair play both demand that the veil should be drawn aside and an objective study should be made of the atrocities on both sides. So basically, on both sides, they applied cruelty. They were very cruel to each other's troops. They were very cruel to each other's community members. Okay, so cruelty was done on both British as well as Indian sides while they fought each other. Okay, while they killed, massacred, injured each other's troops and people belonging to both the European as well as the Indian communities. Okay, so historians like R.C. Majumdar says that we have to look at the atrocities not only on the British side but on the both side, both Indian side and the British side. Okay. Meerut was the scene of the first act of cruelty. Okay, in Meerut, the first act of cruelty was seen, and it was motivated by racial hatred. Okay, it was the indiscriminate massacre of the Englishmen. So a large number of Englishmen or European soldiers were killed in Meerut. People slaughtered, they killed Firangis, okay, Europeans, not even sparing the women and children. Okay, they didn't even leave the women and children. Okay. When the sepoys of Meerut reached Delhi, the bloody scenes were repeated there as well, and a number of Englishmen, women and children were killed, okay, in cold blood. Nielsen writes, every house occupied by European or Eurasian was attacked, and every Christian upon whom hands could be laid were killed. There was no mercy and there was no quarter. Even men, women and children who were kept in custody of Ashaullah were killed with swords of the sepoys. So you see large number of Europeans, okay, along with women and children were killed by the sepoys, the Indian sepoys. At Kanpur, when Mr. Wheeler, the British commander of the fort, had surrendered, Nana Sahib had assured the Englishmen that he would transport them safely by boat to Allahabad. But when the Englishmen started boarding the boat, some Indian soldiers attacked the British soldiers. They killed a large number of Englishmen or the British people who were on that boat. Only 4 British soldiers managed to reach Allahabad safely. About 125 women and children were also killed at Bibighar, and their bodies were thrown into a well. Now let's see what happened at Jhansi. At Jhansi, the mutineers promised personal security to all the Europeans, provided they left the fort without taking any arms. But as soon as they came out, all of them, men, women, and children who had been taking refuge in the fort, they were taken to the garden and killed in cold blood. 2 years after the mutiny, a painter, Joseph Noel Paton, painted a picture whose title was In Memoriam. Now, this picture depicts English women and children huddled in a circle, looking helpless and innocent, seemingly waiting for the inevitable dishonor, violence, and death. So even the painting of Joseph Noel Paton, which is titled In Memoriam, this picture depicts the fear that English women and the children experienced during this time, okay, as they were going to be killed. So this is a picture which depicts the kind of horror that was experienced by the European people. Now, there were instances where the tragedies were ghastly in character, even more cruel. Okay, a letter from Varanasi dated June 16, 1857 described the following scene witnessed by VC Ball at Allahabad. Okay, so let's see what VC Ball at Allahabad says. Read with me, alright? A gang of upwards of two dozen of sepoys cut into an infant boy of 2 or 3 years of age while playing about his mother. Next, they hacked into pieces the lady, and while she was crying out of agonizing pain for safety, fell, most shockingly and horridly, the husband. Similar incidents happened at Bareilly as reported by Durgadas Bandyopadhyay, a Bengali officer there. So you can see from these small statements that are written there, which tells us the horrific scenes that took place during the revolt, okay, which also allows us to understand about the horrific death of the people on both sides. All right. Now, although we said beginning of this small section, we said that how, like R.C. Mazumdar has suggested that cruelty happened on both sides, right? The killings happened on the both side, and these have to be looked at properly. These have to be studied with equal focus, right? We should not only focus at the Indians who killed the European women, children, and men. We also have to focus on the British who killed Indian men, children, and women. Alright. Now, until now, we looked at the cruelty, the acts of cruelty that Indian rebels did on the European community members, European men, women, and children. Okay. Now, we do not have much to tell or to study about the cruelty that has been done on the Indians by the British during the mutiny. Okay, this is why, because most of the sources are written by the British officers, British soldiers. Okay, so when they write, when they paint, when they narrate, those are all from their perspective about themselves. They do not write much about their enemies, the Indian rebels families, their wives, their children, the women who have been killed by the British officers. So that is why we do not see much about the acts of cruelty that were done on the Indian men, women, and children by the British officials during the revolt. Okay, just in the manner that we just learned about the British officers and British men, women, and children who were killed, massacred, hurt by the Indian rebels. Alright, so this we have to understand. We have to first ask, why are there not enough acts of cruelty which the British did on the Indians, right? It's because most of them wrote about themselves and the cruelty that was done on them by the Indians. All right, but they do not write about the cruelty that they did on the Indian counterpart. All right, so that is something that we must remember. So, like we learned about how the Indians did not write about the proclamations, their complaints, what they needed, what they wanted from the revolt. So, they have also not left any record on the atrocities which were committed by the British on them. Okay, the British have written about the atrocities that were committed by the Indians on them, but the Indians, having been illiterate mostly, did not write about the atrocities that were committed on them by the British. Okay. However, some Englishmen had sunk so low in the scale of humanity that they had no scruples on proclaiming their misdeeds, but even took pride in them as if they had done something heroic and chivalrous acts. Thus, we find not only in official records and correspondence, but also in private letters and memoirs, free and frank accounts of terrible and inhuman acts of violence perpetrated by men and officers of the British Army. So, when we have to when we have to study about the atrocities that were committed by the British on the Indian soldiers, Indian sepoys, men, women, and children, we again have to look at the accounts of the British officers and soldiers and scholars, okay? And there, in some of their papers, in some of their accounts, we see that they have written about the inhuman acts of violence perpetrated by their officials, by their colleagues, by their friends, onto the British sepoy, onto the Indian sepoys and their women and children and other men, all right? Now, the news of atrocities, okay, the news of atrocities which the British officials committed on men, women, and children in India, that spread to Britain, okay, that spread to England. And that news of atrocities, inhuman atrocities, cruelty with which the British officers killed, massacred the Indian women, children, and men, that angered and shocked the people in Britain, okay. So now the people in Britain demanded that the challenge to British honor and power be met ruthlessly. Let me begin this again. Now, the news of atrocities, okay, the news of acts of cruelty that was done on the British officials, the European men, women, and children by the Indian rebels that reached Britain, okay, and there when people learned about the events of 1857 and the acts of cruelty done on the Europeans by the Indian natives, that angered and that also brought shock among the people in Britain, okay. Now they became very angry and they started to now talk about revenge, okay. They said that the people had challenged the British honor and power. The Indians had the audacity to challenge the British government, right? So the people now had to be punished ruthlessly, okay? So as a result of this, what happened? Now the British government was to punish or was to give severe punishment to the ones who mutineered, ones who rebelled against the British government. Okay, rebelled against the British government, one who brutally killed the British officials, men and women. Okay, so the Indian mutineers and those who participated in the mutiny and those who participated in the revolt, they were executed, okay, and the images of their executions were printed in popular journals of that time, all right. So here is one of the examples from which we can understand how now with vengeance, with anger and with with the spirit to get revenge. That kind of attitude was unleashed on the Indians. Okay, so let's look at this statement which is given by K. Okay, so K says or writes, Neil gave written instructions to Major Renowned to attack and destroy all the places en route close to road occupied by the enemy. Certain guilty villages, guilty meaning those who had participated in the revolt against the British, they were marked out for destruction for having participated in the revolt, and all men inhabiting them were to be slaughtered. All sepoys of mutinous regiments not having a good account of themselves were to be hanged. The town of Fatehpur, which had revolted, was to be attacked, and the Pathan quarters destroyed with all their inhabitants. So you can see this was the kind of vengeance that the British had developed against the Indians for having raised slogans against them, for having revolted against the British government, for having fighting against them to uproot their rule. Okay, so again we have other here we have other similar instances which shows us the attitude that the British developed from the event of the revolt. All right. Now, another instance that we can see is from Punjab. All right, from Punjab. In Punjab, Frederick Cooper was the deputy commissioner of Amritsar. Okay, so he dealt with the Indians there who had participated against the British government in revolt. Okay, so his action, his punishment for those who had rebelled, that also gives us a picture of their attitude, of the vengeance, of the revenge that they now sought. Okay, so let's look what he did. Small statement from what he did, and we'll try to read that to understand the attitude of a British official towards the Indian rebels. All right, how they were punished for rebelling against the British government. In the morning, those locked up in Thana, so those who mutineered, they were put in jail, right? So in the morning, those who were locked up in the Thana, they were brought in batches of 10. So a batch of 10 was brought in the morning. Confronting them was a firing party. So they were confronted by the firing party. And when the unfortunate victims were at a point blank range, the trigger clicked and every one of the batch of 10 lay dead. So what he was doing, he ordered for all these people to bring in a batch of 10, and they were brought out and they were shot and killed. Okay. The next batch followed to meet the same fate, and this continued till all the men locked up in the Thana had been shot dead. Now came the turn of those who were locked up in a small dungeon in a new building. Okay, when the door of the room was opened, the captives, the ones who were jailed, they were dragged out. Okay, of 61 who were locked, only 11 came out to be executed because the rest were dead already, and they died out of suffocation, and nothing remained but to pull their bodies out. And the ones who came out, they were again shot to death. So these were the kind of attitude that the British officials adopted to deal with the people, the Indian people who had mutineered against them. Okay, this was the kind of punishment that were given to them. All right. Now, these kind of incidents can also be seen from other parts of the country as well. It was not only in Punjab, it was not only in other places like Kanpur where the people were punished with death. Okay, there was no exception for any other place, because everyone who had mutineered against the British, they were to meet with the same fate. So everywhere in India, the English officers now, they made indiscriminate massacre of the ones who were guilty. okay, or innocent. They did not care. But the ones who they thought were involved in the revolt of 1857 against the British government, they were brought, okay, they were put to jail and then brought to submission, and then they were shot to death. They were all executed. So such kind of punishments were met with the ones who were guilty of having revolting against the British government in 1857. All right. Now let us look at the attitude of or the reaction of the people during the revolt. Okay, what were the people thinking about the revolt while it was going on? All right. Now a newspaper called Hindu Patriot, okay, it gives us one of its comment. From one of its comment we can understand what the people thought of the revolt of 1857. So this a small clip from the newspaper is from May 21, May 21st, 1857. Okay. So it says that it is no longer a mutiny but a rebellion. Okay, it says that it's no longer a mutiny. It is as big as it is a big it's a big rebellion. Okay, it's not a mutiny where a small group of people are mutinying against their officers, British officers, but it is a rebellion because all the people have joined, Indian people have joined the sepoys to fight against the British. Okay. Perhaps it will be said that all mutinies, when they attain certain measure of success, rise in the dignity of rebellion. So it says that the mutiny have risen to the size of a rebellion. Okay, it has become big. Many people, all the people have participated in the rebellion. Okay, but the recent mutiny of Bengal army has one particular or peculiar feature. They have from the very beginning drawn the sympathy of the country. Their countrymen view them as martyrs to holy cause and a great national cause. The mutineers have been joined and aided by the civil population. There is not a single native of India who does not feel the full weight of the grievances imposed upon him by the very existence of the British rule. There is no one among educated classes who does not feel his prospects circumscribed and his ambition restricted by the supremacy of that power. At the present moment, the conviction is incredibly strong in the mind of every native that the British government is actuated by a fixed purpose of destroying the religion of native races and converting them to Christianity. Women and children talk of it. So basically this particular clip from the newspaper Hindu Patriot talks about the Indian people's attitude towards the revolt. Okay, and it says that how now the people had started to believe that the purpose of the British government was to destroy the religion of the Indians, to convert them to Christianity. Everybody is talking about it. Okay, whether it be women, children, or men. And now the mutiny is no longer a mutiny because it has turned itself into a rebellion with the participation of the civil population. Now it's not only the soldiers, it's not only the sepoys, it's also the women, it's zamindars, landlords, peasants, traders, etc. Okay, and they all feel that now their lives or they all feel that the Indian people are in danger under the control or under the rule of the British government, and the British government should be removed. Okay, so this kind of reaction among the people was felt during that time, and this can be understood by looking at a small clip from the newspaper called Hindu Patriot. Okay. Now, what did the educated Indians feel, okay, against the revolt? What were they? How did they react? What was their attitude? Okay, so a letter by Loyal Bengali, okay, who was a member of a Young Bengal movement which was influenced by the liberal thinking of England. That letter was written to the editor of Anglo-Indian Friend of India, okay, on 4th June 1857. and it expresses the attitude of English educated Indians. Okay, and then it says young Bengali is not much hostile to see the British government overthrown under existing circumstances. How could they wish otherwise? Were the British government in India overthrown, the young Bengal would doubtlessly be buried in its ruins. So basically, it is being the message that is being conveyed by this letter is that the educated Bengalis of Bengal are thrilled are happy about the rebellion, about how the people have come together to overthrow the British rule, and they are not against it. They are not hostile. They are not unhappy to see the British government being driven out of India. So basically, they are speaking in support of the rebellion of 1857. Okay. Now, from the account of another journalist, he was a celebrated journalist and author. His name was Meredith Townsend. From his account of the revolt of 1857, we can understand, okay, that an Indian on the vast subcontinent did not consider the sepoys nationalist, did not, even if he dreaded their success, feel proud of the few victories. And an old Hindu scholar definitely and openly on the English side actually cried with rage and pain in the writer's presence over a report that Delhi was to be razed. He had never seen Delhi, but to him it was our beautiful city, such a possession of our country. The attitude of contemporary English educated Indians towards the revolt of 1857 was far more ambivalent than Townsend's remarks would suggest. They thought the rebels to be misguided, but they sympathized with them as their brethren and admired the courage for rising in just cause. They also disliked the British, but did not wish to see them swept into sea, derived from satisfaction from their troubles. So another account of Meredith another account, similar account, which tells us about the reaction of the people is from the account of Meredith Townsend, who was a journalist and author. Okay, so he writes in 1882, and what he writes is that during the revolt of 1857, there was no Indian who did not consider the sepoys as nationalist and who were not proud of their victories, the victories they had. Okay, so he says that everybody, all Indians in India during that time felt proud about the rebellion and its success, although it was very small, all right? And everyone considered the sepoys as nationalists, all right? But he also says that there were some who had different understanding of the revolt. Okay, so they were sad to see the destruction or possession of the beautiful cities. All right, so there was one person who was very sad or disappointed when the beautiful city of Delhi was possessed. Okay. Anyway, so now let us look at the interpretations of the event of 1857. Okay, let us look how the events of 1857 or the revolt of 1857 have been interpreted. Some call it a sepoy mutiny, some call it or consider it First War of Independence, some call it conspiracy or conflict between Hindus and Muslims. All right, so let's look at it. The first view is that the first interpretation is that the events of 1857 is the event of Sepoy mutiny. Okay, now most of the European writers hold this view. Okay, they consider this as the ultimate view. All right, and those European writers are John Lawrence, John Seeley, Charles Rykes, Kay Mallison, and Syed Ahmed Khan. All right. And why do they call the events of 1857 a Sepoy mutiny? Because here are the reasons. Okay. They say that the causes of the revolt was military. Okay. The causes which led to the revolt was military. Now they say that the sepoys were not happy. They had complaints about very low salaries. There were complaints about how their religious sentiments were injured. Okay, how their sentiments, how their faith, how their customs were not respected by the British officials and the British government. And according to them, the main cause of the revolt was the use of greased cartridges, which were coated with cow and pig fat, and this was refused by the Indian sepoys because it hurt their sentiments, their religious sentiments. So because of this, they rose in revolt against the British. Okay. And then another reason is that the revolt was first started by the dissatisfied and disgruntled soldiers. So because of these complaints, alright, the revolt was started by the sepoys. They were the first one to start the revolt. So because of that, it can be called a sepoy mutiny. Alright. And they are also of the opinion that the rebels had no support of the common people. Okay, they say that the common people did not support the rebelling sepoys. All right, and they also say another reason is that the revolt was confined mainly to some parts of the country, such as Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, central India. They were not spread across the country. So if it was not spread across the country, that means the mutiny was not big. It was a small one, because of which it makes it a mutiny and not a rebellion. Okay. And very little impact was done, very little effect was very little effect or very little impact of the revolt was seen in Punjab, Sindh and South India. Okay. And another reason for the consideration is that they say that only few contingents of the sepoy rose in revolt. It was not that all the regiments of the British military service or the British army rose in revolt against the British. Okay, like for example, the Sikhs, the Rajput and the Gurkha regiments, they did not rise against them. Okay, so it was only small group or only some contingents or some regiments of the Indian sepoys that rose in a revolt. And the last reason for their point that the events of 1857 is a mutiny, is a sepoy mutiny, is that all native rulers of India did not join the revolt. Okay, it was only the sepoys. They did not have support of the common people, and neither did the native rulers support or join the revolt. Okay. So it was only those who had personal grievances against the British that joined the revolt. Like for example, Nana Sahib, Rani Lakshmi Bai, alright. They were the ones who joined, but other than that, the native rulers, the princely kingdoms did not join the revolt. Alright. Now the second kind of interpretation, so the first interpretation of the events of 1857 was that it was a sepoy mutiny, right? Now another group of people, they consider it as the first war of independence. Okay, now this obviously these are the people who do not believe that, or who think that the revolt of 1857 was not only led and not only was expressed by the unsatisfied, unhappy sepoys, Indian sepoys. Okay, there were other social causes, economic causes, political causes, along with the causes of the sepoys, along with the grievances of the sepoys, which led to the outbreak of the revolt. Okay, so they are the ones who believe that it can be considered as the first war of independence. All right. Now, the points that they stress, which allows us to understand, which allows us to consider that the revolt of 1857 was the first war of independence, is that the first point is that all the sections of the Indian society joined the revolt. Okay, so this was not only a revolt led and joined by the Indian sepoys, but this was a revolt which was joined by all the sections of the Indian society, like farmers, the farmers, the landlords, the peasants, the traders, etc. Okay. The second point is that role of women. So this revolt saw participation of women. Okay, so women were just like the men, very inspired. Okay, they were inspired to fight against the British. All right, so they fought alongside the men in the war, in their fight against the British. Okay. The third point is that the leaders were not motivated by the selfish interests. Now, in this event, we saw that how the revolt was led by various leaders in various areas, like in various cities. In Delhi, it was Bahadur Shah II. In Jhansi, it was Rani Lakshmi Bai. So there were different leaders at different places. In Bahadur, in Bihar, there was Kunwar Singh, right? But all these leaders were not motivated by their own selfish interest. Okay, their only aim of this revolt was to get rid of the British rule, was to remove the British rule, was to uproot the British government from the Indian soil. Okay, so all of them had the same motive, all of them, they had the same objective, and they were not motivated by different interests or their own selfish interest. Okay. Their motive was to free the Indians from the foreign rule, the rule of the British government. Okay. The fourth point in support of it is that the revolt was pre-planned. Okay. Now it is said that this revolt did not take place overnight. Okay, it just didn't happen one day. There was planning which went on behind the organization of this revolt for many months before it actually broke out. All right, so this also signifies that how people had already been conscious about their grievances. Okay, they had their complaints, and they were suppressing it, and they were planning to one day express all of it in the form of revolt, in the form of rebellion against the British. Okay. And this is how it happened. They planned for months before the actual outbreak. All right. And the fifth point is that the long-standing grievances of the Indians. Now we already know the complaints or why the Indians were not happy, why the sepoys were not happy, why the traders were not happy, why the peasants were not happy, right? So we know that the British had declined, the economic had brought decline to India's economy, polity, as well as society. Okay. And there was degeneration in all these aspects. All right, and people now did not like the newly introduced land revenue system. It had removed the it had removed the zamindars, it had removed the landlords, right? It had increased the burden of the payment of revenue on the peasants, right? It had destroyed the cottage industry, so it had affected the weavers, the artisans, it had affected the traders and merchants, because the trade was monopolized by the British government, right? So all these grievances of the people, they had been long standing, they were there since a long time, and this ultimately brought the people together to fight together against the British. Okay. And of course, we already know that the complaints of the sepoys were that they were not paid well, they were paid very less, they did not get respect, they were exploited, right? And then we also know how the cartridges were greased with cow and pig fat, and that insulted, that attacked their religious faith, their custom, right? And this was not acceptable to them. This hurt their religious sentiments, and all these grievances led to the revolt of the outbreak of the revolt. All right. Now, the last point of this, for the consideration of this interpretation, is that the national awakening was emerging, the emergence of national awakening. Now, in this in the event of 1857, what we can see is that how the revolt spread across the northern part of India, right? It was successful in spreading from Bengal to Delhi to Punjab. Now, this is 1857 that we are talking about, right? Where the communication was not properly laid out, where there was no modern transport system, right? So it was difficult for messages to be sent. It was difficult for people to send messengers and give messages. It was difficult for the organization of a revolt such as the revolt of 1857. But despite that, people were able to mobilize, right? People were able to mobilize themselves and in their fight against the British, right? And had there been proper modes of transportation and communication, then people would have had a better opportunity at standing at better opportunity in their fight against the British, in standing strong against the British. All right. So despite that lacuna, despite how it lacked, how it was affected by lack of transportation and communication, what we can understand from this event is that there was a national awakening among the people across the nation. Okay, there was an emergence of nationalism among the people. People had begun to have common interest and feel that feeling of how everyone should come together and fight against a colonial rule, a foreign rule. Okay, so such spirit, such awakening, such consciousness was developing. All right. Now, another interpretation of the event of 1857 is that some consider it an Muslim organized revolt. Okay, so historians like James Outram and others, they consider the revolt of 1857 as a Muslim organized revolt. Okay, where the Muslims took advantage of the dissatisfaction of the Hindus. Okay, so they say that the Muslims took advantage of the dissatisfaction, of the hatred, of the unhappiness among the British, and they took advantage of it and then caused the outbreak of the revolt. Okay. But obviously this interpretation has flaws, right? Because we already know that the event of 1857 saw the unity and organization of both the Muslims as well as the Hindu people and sepoys. Okay, both of them came together and fought against the British. All right. Now, the next interpretation is that of the modern historians. Okay, what does the modern historians tell about the events of 1857? What do they think it is? Okay. Now, R.C. Majumdar, in his book The Sepoy Mutiny and the Revolt of 1857, observes that the revolt was started by the sepoys, but some disgruntled elements joined them. So he says that the revolt was started, of course, by the sepoys, but others, okay, other Indians who had complaints against the British government joined them. All right. But the rebels were not inspired by national feeling. Okay, they only fought for their personal interests. That's what R.C. Majumdar says. He says that Of course, it was started by sepoys and then others joined in like peasants, zamindars, traders. But the rebels, the ones who rebelled, they were not inspired by national feeling. They were only fighting against the British so that their interests, their personal interests could be fulfilled. Their personal interests could be addressed. Okay. Another historian, Dr. S. N. Sen, in his book 1857, he supports the view that the rebels were not motivated by any national interest. Besides the native sepoys, some orthodox and reactionary elements joined the revolt. The orthodox people wanted the traditional practices of India wanted that the traditional practices of India should be restored. Now, Dr. S. N. Sen, in his book 1857, he says also on similar lines that of R.C. Mazumdar, and he supports that argument that the rebels were not motivated by national interest. All right. Now, another historian, Dr. S.B. Chowdhury, in his book Civil Rebellion and the Indian Mutiny, and in his other book, Theory of Indian Mutiny, he suggests that the uprising of 1857 was popular uprising on a large scale. And though it did not spread to the whole of the country and to all the sections of the Indian society, but people were sympathetic to the revolt because they were dissatisfied with the British rule. At many places, the Hindus and the Muslims, especially the Marathas and Rajputs, took active part in the mutiny. Okay, so S.B. Chowdhury says that although the mutiny did not spread all across the country and not all the people took part in it, but it was a big rebellion. Okay, it was a large-scale uprising. All right. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, in his book Discovery of India, writes that mutiny was mainly the revolt of Jagirdars or feudal lords, and they were fighting for their own rights and privileges. But there were some traces of national elements in it. Now, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, in his book Discovery of India, says that the revolt was mainly the revolt of the Jagirdars, the Zamindars, okay, and they fought for their personal interests, but there were some traces of national elements in it. So these are some of the interpretations of the events of 1857. All right. Now, another important feature of the events of 1857 or the uprisings of 1857 is that it provided a source of inspiration for the nationalist movement in the 20th century. Now, there has been a debate, like we already know. Some consider that it had nationalist elements. Some historians consider, some scholars consider it did not have any national events, right? People fought for their own interests. But one thing is clear, that is that this event became significant event. Why? Because it provided inspiration for the national movement in the 20th century, the freedom struggle, okay, against the British, as a result of which in 1947 finally India got independence. All right, so the inspiration came from the uprising of 1857. Okay. The whole phenomenon of nationalist imagination was woven around this great uprising. Okay, the imagination, the nationalist imagination. All right, so it was celebrated as the first war of Indian independence, and by such celebration, it brought all the sections of the people, okay, of the country to fight against the British. Okay, so such imaginations were created, okay, such imaginations of nationalist phenomena or feeling where people were brought together under the same roof to fight against the British rule, okay. So art and literature, okay, and also the writings, it contributed largely in keeping the memory of the uprising of 1857 and its inspiration. Okay, the leaders of uprising were presented as heroes, okay, which led the country into battle, which aroused a feeling of nationalism against against its oppressive colonial rulers. So these kind of presentations were made by the art and literature and also by the writings of this event. Okay. Now, heroic poems were written about some of the rulers like Rani of Jhansi, okay, with a picture, with a very popular picture of her with a sword in one of her hands, okay, and the reins of the horse in the other, okay. So these kind of images were set. Okay, these kind of images were set to arouse a certain kind of feeling, a feeling of nationalism, a feeling that they should fight against a foreign oppression. Okay, this kind of feeling was expressed by poems, by art, literature. All right. The Rani of Jhansi, okay, Rani Lakshmi Bai, was presented as a masculine figure chasing the enemy, slaying the British soldiers and valiantly fighting till her last breath. So such kind of picture was presented, okay. And lines of Subhatra Kumari Chauhan, खूब लड़ी मर्दानी, वो तो झांसी वाली रानी थी, which means like the men she fought, she was the Rani of Jhansi. So these kind of lines were recited by men, women and children in many parts of the country. So the circulation of these kind of representations of the heroes of the mutiny, they gave a sense of a nationalist feeling among the people to bring them together and to fight against the British rule. Okay. So images like the image or the picture of Rani of Jhansi, that depicted the determination of Indians to fight against injustice and foreign rule. Okay, so it helped shape the nationalist ideas. So here, if you look to the right, there's an image of Rani Ki Jhansi, where she's seen fighting the British, the foreign rule, okay, the oppressive foreign rulers, and then she looks like a brave hero who is on a horse with a sword in one of her hands. So she is determined to fight against injustice and foreign rule. So these kind of depictions, which were put forward by art, literature, and also writings, helped shape a nationalist idea, okay, or nationalist ideas, which went on to shape the nationalist movement in the 20th century, okay. So we can conclude by saying that the revolt of 1857, of course, it was started by the sepoys, right? But then it was joined over time by other people, the common people, the zamindars, the traders, people coming from different sections of society, even women, right? So it took a form of a large scale uprising, right? So it became it took a form of a national revolt, all right? And what we must understand and what we must consider is that this event, although it failed, it inspired the ideas of nationalism, which shaped the freedom struggle of our country, which inspired the national leaders of our country to get independence finally in 20th century in 1947. All right. Now let us look at the causes and the impact of the revolt of 1857. Okay, so we have already touched upon this aspect of the revolt. So we know that there were many causes which led to the outbreak of the mutiny. All right. So some has regarded it as a Muslim organized mutiny, okay, who by exploiting some like Outram has regarded it as Muslim organized mutiny where the Muslims exploited the Hindu grievances, all right. Now some have also regarded it as a purely military outbreak, the outbreak caused by the sepoys and their grievances. Okay, and there are others who have considered that the westernization, the elements of westernization which were introduced into the Indian society, that also caused fear and panic among the Indians, and that led to the cause of the outbreak of 1857. All right. And we also know that rumors were spread, and these rumors were shaped by the policies, all right, the policies of the British government. And the rumors also played an important role in shaping the revolt, in causing the outbreak of the revolt. And these rumors, they attacked their age-old system of life, their religion, their culture, okay? And it was believed that the British, the Europeans were trying to destroy the culture, religion of the Indians, and they were trying to forcefully convert the Hindus and Muslims to Christianity. So such rumors also created fear, panic among the Indians, and that led to the outbreak of the 1857, the revolt of the 1857. And we know that one of the main causes of the revolt was the grievances of the sepoys, right? How they were deprived of respect, how they believed that their religious sentiments were hurt by the British officials and the British government, and how they were not given any respect. They were paid very low wages, etc. That also caused the outbreak of the uprising. And of course, we know that the main cause of the revolt was the fact that the gun cartridges, were greased with pork and beef fat or cow fats, right? And this hurt the religious sentiments of the Indian sepoys. Now, the other important causes of the revolt of 1857 was the military cause, right? How the Indian sepoys were looked upon with contempt by their English officers, by the British officers, by the seniors. They were given very less salaries, and they were given no allowances, with no break from work, right? And how their religious sentiments were injured, and how they were not respected. So it went on to form the main cause for the outbreak of the revolt of 1857. All right. And of course, the impact of the event of 1857 was huge. Although the event was not successful, the revolt of 1857 failed. Right? The Indian rebels were not successful in uprooting the foreign rule or the British rule, or freeing the Indians from the rule of the foreign government. But what it did was it sowed the seeds of nationalism. Okay, so it resulted in the birth and growth of nationalism in India. Okay, and this led on to cause the nationalist ideas that became the backbone for the freedom struggle of India in the 20th century. Okay.